Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Tim Goff here, CEO and founder of MyGroundForce, the AI software solution that fully automates the line haul back office, as we like to say. Automate, optimize, succeed. I'm your host for the webinar series, Prosper During the FedEx Transformation. Learn to think like a Fortune 500 executive. Today is session 12 of 12. When we finish today, you're going to have spent about 14 hours with me. Hopefully, they've been beneficial. Remember, all of these sessions are available to you on easy for me to say, the YouTube channel, MyGroundForce. You can rewatch them as many times as you want. This content is free. As we go along, we'll be posting poll questions. We'd really appreciate your participation in those. They're yes/no questions. We're just trying to pulse the audience on how we're doing on providing content that's in your sweet spot. So today we're going to talk about why companies go bad. Interesting topic. You don't hear it talked about a whole lot amongst a lot of folks. Hang on just one second. Let me fix my phone. As you know, I communicate with my support team by WhatsApp, so I forgot to do one setting. So anyway, we're going to talk about why companies go bad. So we don't really talk about that. You know, we see it a lot as FedEx contractors. We see companies go away and we just assume they screwed something up and FedEx got rid of them. But usually these things don't happen overnight. They kind of come along. There are a series of indicators. You can kind of watch things if you know what you're looking for. And I've talked about some of those things as we've gone through the previous 11 sessions, okay? So anyway, Norb says my hair is looking really good today. That's really good to hear because that's not usually the case. All right, so here we go. Look back. The concept associated with have you felt the need, or what is the need to change your thinking? Okay, so let's talk about that. So we talked about the state of the network. Hey, man, there is a complete earthquake going on in your ecosystem where you work. FedEx is changing. There's a new email every day that indicates that. We talked about what are their expectations of you. By the way, the new FY25 started on June 1st. This is going to be the most traumatic year of all time for FedEx contractors. Just mark my words. Though 24 was pretty traumatic in many ways, but you're going to see some things this year. I think a lot of these things are going to be in the contract and they're going to give you pause. So be prepared. We looked at the current contract and what you're responsible for. We talked to a Wall Street analyst that kind of gave us some ideas about why transformation was needed and what its impact on us would be. We had some questions and answers on that. That was an excellent session. And then I started in with trying to help you understand how to think like a Fortune 500 executive. What would you be doing if you were in a Fortune 500 company managing your way through such a situation? What skills would you need to lean on to help you be successful? Because look, when you're the head of a division in a Fortune 500 company, you are the man or woman. They're expecting you to handle it. And if you don't handle it, you get fired. There's no easy exit on that situation. In my case, it was a $125 million division in a day when that was a whole lot of money across 5 continents. It was a lot. And I've tried to bring that expertise to you in this series. We talked about quality principles and leadership. Boy, these are extremely important foundational principles to run a successful business in any industry. And we're going to talk about those who don't believe in that a little while later. We talked about how to get to world-class excellence. We talked about why that should be your target, right? And then what would be that road that you would take to get there? It was very detailed. Hopefully you took notes, and it works. We talked about how to leverage metrics to understand your business and how to take data, which is what you get in your settlement and from other places, and add value to it and turn it to decision information so that you can make some decisions, the right decisions, and repeat those right decisions based on a fundamental principle of sound data. Remember what I say, he who commands the data controls the battlefield, right? You remember what Sun Tzu said? Warriors win the battle before the battle is fought. Okay? And we talked about how to do that in detail. Then we went through all the things you're responsible for in order to be compliant with that humongous contract that 80% of contractors have not even read. That still is crazy to me that you would invest millions of dollars and never read the document that you're going to win or lose by, you're going to live or die by. That's just crazy to me. I hope I've inspired some of you guys to read that contract in detail. Man, you have got to do that, as boring as it is. And we talked about what that is. Some of you responded, Tim, you scared the hell out of me with that conversation. Yeah, I hope it scared the hell out of you, because you got to have a process, a sound process, to handle all those things that we talked about on that particular session. We talked about how to leverage technology as a partner in many ways to handle about half or more of those things that you're responsible for in terms of compliance. You can get that done using state-of-the-art automation if you sign up for the right solution that can do all those things for you. Remember, there's disparate solutions that can do all of it or some of it to some degree, but there's very few. In fact, I think only one solution that can do all of it for you. We talked about decision making as a science. Okay, decision making as a science. There are reams of books written on how to make sound decisions. We talked about many decision models, and we applied those to the FedEx contractor business. And then we talked last week about strategy. And what does that look like for the road ahead? And what's the history of strategy? What are some ways to go about developing your strategy? What are some ways to express your strategy? I think that was eye-opening for a lot of folks. I've gotten a lot of really interesting feedback on last week's session. I appreciate all that. And so then today we're essentially culminated. You've graduated from the course on understanding the transformation, and then how to think like a Fortune 500 executive to be successful during the transformation. So what we're going to talk about today is what happens if you didn't change your thinking, and what causes good companies to go bad. So let's get into it. So what happens if you don't change your thinking? Okay, so why do good companies go bad? I told you that we're going to lean on Harvard Business Studies today. This is not Tim Goff coming to you, making stuff up to convince you to buy software or buy consulting. That's not what's happening. I am going to talk to you about real world Fortune 500 companies that blew up like bottle rockets because they didn't change their thinking. So what we've talked about for 11 weeks is real world stuff. Okay, it's not confined to the FedEx Ground TSP ecosystem. Okay, it's what I'm trying to help you understand is that your company resides in the ocean of economics globally. You are not in some little island on your own, apart from everything else, and what you do is fully independent of everything that's going on in the world. Could not be further from the truth. FedEx is a Fortune 50 company. They're occupying a big ship on that ocean. We talked about the FedEx enterprise value is equivalent to, at the time when we talked about it, $80 billion, which would rank 80th on the list of countries. Okay, that's a humongous responsibility that FedEx has. And you're a part of that. You are not isolated in your little area apart from all the things that go on. So when you watch industry as a whole, you can learn from what's going on out there. It applies to you. What we've been teaching you is real world economic lessons on how to handle your company. And we're going to talk about what happens when real world companies fail to follow the same advice that I've given you. Now, look, we've talked a little bit about active inertia. Look, it's not assumed, I don't assume that companies are suddenly paralyzed, okay? And I'm not saying your company is paralyzed, or maybe your fellow contractors are paralyzed. Most folks are working, they're swimming like ducks, but in many cases, they're swimming in the wrong direction. They have misanalyzed what happened. And I'm going to give you real world examples. Firestone was a huge company when I was a little kid, and it went out of business. They brought the brand back now, but it's not what it was. Laura Ashley was a humongous brand that's still around, but it's significantly reduced. We're going to talk about their stories because we can learn some lessons from that. And we're going to learn about the concept of active inertia. Now, we talked about it. I told you to go look it up. Hopefully you did. We're going to spend some time on that today. Look, active inertia is not rare. I'm not talking about it as some deep, dark trade secret, and I'm unveiling it for you today as only Tim Goff could do. No. Unfortunately, in business, because businesses are all run by humans who are all motivated by their own set of biases, okay, it's actually pretty common. In fact, it's so common that we really need to talk about it, and we're going to today. So then we're going to talk about how bad companies become good. And we're going to use a couple other examples, right? The amazing story of IBM. If you're not as old as I am, you might not remember what was going on with IBM, but we're going to talk about it. And it's a great example for us, okay? I'm just talking about examples that I believe can help us in the TSP world. And then some of you asked, and I thought it was appropriate to include, well, what if you got employees who can't come along for the ride? Okay, I guarantee you every one of you have those. I was at a meeting this weekend with an incredibly sophisticated and successful contractor. They do a whole bunch of stuff right. They're very impressive. The way they go about communicating with their employees, the way they have formed their culture. You can just, when you're around those people, and there were 200 employees, they're huge, right? $18 million. There were 200 employees in that room. And you could feel the culture. It was incredibly impressive. I was very fortunate to be a part of that. I was impressed. They have done a good job of bringing employees along, and they're my ground force customer right there on the leading edge of this transformation and leveraging technology and all the things that we're doing. They've watched all the webinars. They are my example of how to take what I've been talking about, including the My Ground Force solution, and implement it with successful results. And they're bringing their people along for the ride. We're going to talk about that. Okay, so here we go. Sorry. What happens if you don't change your thinking? So let's talk Firestone. All right, who was Firestone and why is it important? Okay, Firestone, when I was a kid, was everywhere in the country. In fact, when my daddy was a kid, Firestone was everywhere in the country, right? They were founded in 1900, and you talk about innovative. They had figured out in 1900 how to provide solid rubber tires for fire trucks, which were wagons, and then kind of very early combustion engine fire trucks. And then they transitioned to pneumatic tires for wagons and buggies and cars and trucks. Okay, I mean, think about that. They were creating an industry. FedEx created an industry. Fred Smith created an industry in the late 60s when he got back from Vietnam. By the way, if you've never studied the Fred Smith story, you should. That is one hell of an inspiring man, and what he's been able to accomplish in his life is nothing short than astounding. And so I encourage you to read up on Fred Smith if you haven't done it. But Bob Firestone was one of those guys too. He created an industry. Tires. He created tires. Otherwise, it would still be on wooden wheels, right? He became the top supplier of tires nationwide, along with Goodyear. And how did he do that? Well, he evolved along the way through the war and the post-war. When we say the war, we're talking about World War II. The post-war environment, he saw all those different myriad of car companies that existed in the first half of the 20th century kind of reduced down to what they called the big three: Ford, GM, Chrysler. And he got in along with Goodyear, they were both kind of tied as the main supplier of tires to the big three. All right, well, they were producing cars like it was going out of style, not only domestically, but for international markets, and it was a constant growth trend. So if you just kept doing what you're doing this year, next year would be successful. And then next year, if you just kept doing what you did this year, then the year after that would be successful. So you kind of get in a habit of doing things a certain way. You organize your company in a certain way, and you achieve success. It's easy to do in a growing market. Does this sound familiar? So what Bob did and his family along the way, because Bob didn't make it all the way to the 70s. They implemented strong core values. They had an ingrained culture, methods, and structure. They had a very rigid way the way they did things. They empowered folks in the field. It was a bottom-up CapEx structure, which was really innovative. And there was never a man in charge of anything at Firestone that hadn't worked his whole life at Firestone. Started in the field, worked his way up, man. That's how Firestone was. That's how a lot of companies were in those days. However, as is happening right now in the FedEx world, something came along and transformed the market. Now, the market's not necessarily transforming for FedEx. E-commerce has been Zoom climbing, but FedEx knows that. They're ahead of it. What the market condition that's changed for you is FedEx's reaction to where they are in that marketplace. We talked about it being a delayed reaction of at least 10, but probably 15 years. Okay, but it's here now, and so it's created a traumatic economic event for you, and that's what we've spent 11 weeks talking about. Well, Firestone experienced one of those. They've been making standard rubber tires with tubes, and for cars the rubber would just wear out. You get another tire. But then along comes Michelin, and they invented the steel-belted radial. I remember when those came out. That's how old I am. And look, that changed the world. I remember conversations the old men would have at the store. Am I going to put them steel-belted radials on my old truck, or am I going to keep using Firestone? Well, the reason you would switch is the tires were way safer, and they lasted 2 to 3 times as long. So you'd make an investment in tires, a true investment, and it would last a long time. So over the course of time, it was clear radial tires are going to take over the market. Now, Firestone knew this was coming. They were not ignorant of what was going on. They just didn't handle it very well. And then they jumped into making radial tires. They worked hard. They had all sorts of numbers. They were not paralyzed. The problem is they changed nothing. They just did everything the same way, a bottom-up CapEx structure, same people, same machines, same everything. They didn't change any of their processes. They just tried to make radial tires the same way, with the same infrastructure, the same number of people, everything. Now, look, think about this. If what you make lasts twice as long in a flat market, your production is going to be half as much. So if you keep the same structure and the same people and the same approach to everything, guess what's going to happen? And that's what happened to Firestone. Okay? And so they had a very quick response. They started working like bees, but they were doing the same thing. They weren't getting anywhere. They certainly weren't going where they needed to go. Okay? And their response ended up being effective. And why was it ineffective? Because that management team stuck to its core values, its ingrained cultures, the way it did things. I know how to make tires. I'm going to keep making them the same way. You guys ever hear that around the terminal? I hear it. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to keep doing it. I'm just going to do it with this. And so their historical strategic bias amidst this complete change in their strategic environment. I hope by this point in this webinar series, you have understood that you are in the midst of a complete change in your strategic environment. And if you cling to how you've done business in the past, you are going to be ineffective in your response. It's not Tim saying it. It's the Harvard Business Study saying it, because they've analyzed hundreds of companies. What they found applies to you. You are not immune to economic analysis from outside the TSP world, regardless of what experienced TSPs might tell you. Okay, what happened? They lasted till 1989, but they were sold for 10 cents on the dollar to a Japanese tire firm. Now, you might see Firestone around, but they're not what they were. They're not the market leader. So that's a story that applies to us. We can learn lessons from what happened to Firestone. Okay? They found themselves in the same ocean we're in, and they didn't do a good job with it. Okay? You can read up on Firestone. You can just go to Wikipedia and read up on them. Okay? They jumped all over it, but it ended up being a grenade. All right, now let's talk Laura Ashley. Now, I have to admit, I don't know a daggone thing about Laura Ashley. I learned something about who Laura Ashley was and the company she built. It's a pretty amazing story that ended up, and they're still around, but they're certainly not what they were. So Laura Ashley was founded in 1953 by Laura and Sir Bernard Ashley, and the goal was to create clothes that kind of recreated the mood in the marketplace of the British countryside. This is just something Laura felt would add value. She was the son of a knight, right? Hell, she wasn't hurting for money, but this is what she felt she wanted to do. She started in her garage. She had some ladies that made clothes in the garage, and man, post-war England was really kind of hungry for that, and she just hit the market. And of course, the British Empire was flung all over the world, right? So it was collapsing during that time, but the appetite for the old-time British countryside was there, the pre-war era. And man, Laura Ashley grew that company like gangbusters. You talk about having the right answer at the right time. Mercy's sake, she went from her garage to 500 stores. Whew, that's a lot, all over the world. And she made all her clothes in Wales. In fact, she put tags on her clothes, made in Wales. She was proud of the fact that they were made in the British countryside. Now, you can already see where this is going, right? Remember, Laura Ashley's floating on that ocean. In that ocean, the weather changes. It might be smooth today and you went to 500 stores, but there's a storm ahead. You got to plan for the storm. You got to have internal mechanisms to be able to react to the storm. And you guys are telling me you feel that this webinar series has equipped you to handle the storm you're facing. And that storm may actually intensify in the next 12 months, okay? And so let's see what happened to them. You know, they grew that brand and they were making money hand over fist, and they didn't really care about profits per se. They didn't manage KPIs. Their goal was to fight back against the 60s and 70s, right? When sex, drugs, and rock and roll took over the world, and Laura wanted to be a pillar in the midst of that crazy storm and uphold traditional values. That was her goal. She didn't make mini skirts. She didn't make low-hanging blouses, these kinds of things. And because of that, she cultivated a fierce loyalty from her franchisees and her customers. And then, Laura died in 1985. She had run one hell of a successful company for 30 years. But there were a lot of things changing in that ocean, and they had not adjusted one bit because that pillar was made out of stone and she wasn't adjusting. She'd gone through the sex, drugs, rock and roll era. Now she's in the 80s, and women are flooding the marketplace in ever stronger roles. Well-educated, highly intelligent ladies are no longer staying at home. There's nothing wrong with staying at home. I'm not suggesting that. And I'm not taking a position on Laura's position, okay? I'm just telling you what the ocean was looking like. So where all these women were staying at home and ordering Laura and buying Laura Ashley clothes, they weren't ordering them in those days. All of a sudden, a ton of those women in the next generation were in the workplace. Some of them were alongside me flying combat airplanes, and they were good, okay? So the other thing that was happening, particularly in the 80s, the Japanese suddenly appeared in the U.S. with cars that were good, well-made cars. They had implemented total quality principles. In fact, they invented total quality principles in Japan. And then all of a sudden, if you were not outsourcing internationally, you were going to be at a deficit competitively because of cost structure. And so everybody started shifting clothes offshore. You know, North Carolina used to be the sock-making capital of the world, and I challenge you to even find a sock or T-shirt factory in North Carolina. They're all gone, you know. And look, I'm not defending the practice or anything. I'm just telling you what happened. They all left. Laura kept making clothes in Wales. Not good. Okay, so the brand lost power due to societal changes, and the burden of infrastructure impacted manufacturing. The way she did things just was too heavy for the market. It just sunk down. Does that sound familiar? I hope it does. Ultimately, that brand was sold to a Malaysian group. Now it's been sold to another group. It's still around, but it's greatly reduced. But everything is now manufactured outside of the UK. Poor Laura's not here, neither is Sir Bernard, but hey, their brand is still here. They're still making some money off the way clothes used to be. There's still an appetite for some of that. But the only way to make it work is take it offshore. So I'm hoping those two examples are instructive because I think they apply directly to us. As I studied this, I'm like, I know contractors who look like Bob Firestone, who look like Laura Ashley, who refuse to change with the times. I hear it. Remember, I talk to hundreds of contractors, and I hear stuff that that sometimes I'm just appalled by, but it's their company. They invested their millions. So let's talk about active inertia. You may have heard this referred to in the past as the Icarus paradox, right? And this is how we all learned paradox. Icarus built a set of wings to get out of prison, and he flew too close to the sun, and the sun melted his wings, and he died from the fall. But hey, he died a free man. He wasn't in prison. Okay? So it essentially refers to the phenomenon of a business failing abruptly after a period of apparent success. And this failure is brought about by the very elements that led to their initial success. Hey, I've given you examples of that in this webinar series. I've given you examples of my customers who were here and gone now because of this very situation. Okay? It's happening before our eyes. Many of you out there are being talked to by FedEx to be a contingency standby because they got their eyes on taking out one of your fellow compadres in the TSP world. I know, guys. I hear it. They call me. Then, Tim, what is this? And I explain it to them. Okay, it's happening. Okay? Extremely successful businesses often face problems maintaining their success. You look, Bob Firestone made money for 70 years, but then he blew up like a bottle rocket. And the reason he did is he kept doing the same thing the same way and saying it always has worked for me in the past, it's going to work for me in the future. FedEx is not really changing. It's still going to be what it's always been. And look, we've already proven that to be false, and I didn't have to do it. Matt Woodruff proved that to you. The future FedEx has gone. The past FedEx is already gone. It's not dying. It's dead. You can't base your business on what you did 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. You'll be out of business. Check this out. I thought this was crazy. Remember, the 60s were boom time in the U.S., right? From 1950 till 1972, the U.S. economy was on fire. And it was boom town. All over the world, the U.S. brand was, because coming out of World War II, there was U.S. and then everybody else. We were the world's largest manufacturer. We could do things that nobody thought was possible, and we were doing it all over the world. Think about those Fortune 100 companies in 1966. They were some strong companies. Firestone was in that group, by the way. 40 years later, right? I'm out of the Naval Academy, 40 years, so I can remember 40 years ago. So in 2006, 40 years later, 66% of the Fortune 100 was out of business. Business. Man, Fortune 100 to gone like a cool summer breeze. You should learn from that. 15 were there, but they weren't on the list anymore. Only 19% of the Fortune 100 made it through 40 years. Okay? We're going to talk about one of those shortly. But think about that. 1 in 5 companies that was on the Fortune 100 stayed on the Fortune 100. Hey, if you're investing your money, keep that in mind. But look, if you think you're a great contractor now, you might not be in the future. You've got to swim on this ocean. You've got to be able to handle flat waves, medium waves, heavy waves, hurricanes. You're in a hurricane right now. You got to be able to handle all that, and you can't do it the same way. Just what we've been talking about for 11 weeks. And now we're just talking about examples. Hey, there's my astronaut. He's a little late to the game. Okay. So active inertia continues. Successful companies tend to fail precisely because of their strengths and past victories. I used to get runs like this. I'm going to keep getting runs like that. This engenders overconfidence. You know some of those contractors. I know some of those contractors, and they become complacent. And then when they need to respond, they do the same thing they've always done. So those characteristics that drove their success, their tried and true business strategies, their dauntless and self-assured management that knows everything, their signature products, right? And the reciprocal action with their customers, and the overall combination of this together, when employed in excess, ultimately leads to declining sales, profits, and bankruptcy. 66% of the Fortune 100 in 1966 is gone. Whew, that was an eye-opening statistic for me, I tell you. And I spend, if you can see my stack of business books, this is all I do, man. I do this for fun, and I didn't know that number. Okay, and I'm printing this stuff on your screen because I want you to see it. I don't want to paraphrase it. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to read it to you, but it's important. You can read it too. Look, this happens. This happens as managers make unwise decisions based on past strategies that worked, that they think are still relevant. Your maintenance strategy of the past worked, but it might not work now. I'm going to suggest a couple maintenance strategies to you today. Some companies exploit as much as possible the strategies that made themselves successful. They centralize their focus on those things, that help them launch their brand. Look, you have a brand. I guarantee you FedEx knows what your brand is. They're measuring your brand now using the medals, even though a lot of contractors don't pay attention to medals. I had one tell me that the other day. I don't put much faith in that medals thing. It's all screwed up. And my answer to was, the medals program is a great program. The way it's currently being implemented is flawed. But whether you believe in it or not, FedEx believes in it. And they will throw your ass out if you don't meet their expectations, regardless of what you think. You got to keep that in mind. That metals program is on the ocean, and it'll be there. If you leave the ocean, it's still going to be there. So you got to play ball in the metals program. You got to figure out how to make it happen. And whether or not their implementation is faulty doesn't matter. They become blinded to the changes in the external business environment. Man, I've been talking about that. This is week 12. I've been talking about that. And so what I have learned through my study for you, and I've been studying strategy now for about 3 months. And part of that applies to today's conversation. You know, I listened to something like 60 hours worth of books to get ready for the strategy presentation last week. And I learned a lot. Okay. And what I learned is that companies become blinded to changes in their business environment. And that is true in the FedEx world. You see it as well as I do. Okay. Let's take a look at active inertia. Here's a chart for you to remember. Where's my astronaut? The dynamics of failure. Leading companies can become stuck in their mode of thinking and working that brought them their initial success. You would think they're writing this about FedEx contractors. When business conditions change, their once winning formula instead brings failure. Remember what I said earlier. Active inertia is so common that we have to talk about it. When I say common, I don't mean just in the TSP world. I'm talking in the business world at large. And we just talked about 2 global brands that blew up because of what you see on your screen. You're being equipped from their failures. We are learning from them. We're teaching you so you don't do this. Okay? Receive it. And why did this happen? Because their strategic frames on how they saw the world became blinders. The way FedEx Awards runs is going to continue. I got all the points. Nobody's got more points than me. I'm going to keep getting runs. Meanwhile, FedEx is sticking contract language in there that tells you they don't even have to do points anymore. They absolutely did it. So your set of assumptions that determines how you view the business is now faulty. If you're thinking that, you think you've been around forever, you're always going to get the best runs. Wrong answer, Batman. Okay, processes. Their process becomes routine. And I hear this a lot because my software is disruptive to your routine. And so many people tell me, I can't get my head around it. I don't understand technology. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I have explained to you that that is the express lane to being a former contractor. We talked about costs, right? We talked about your growth curve, which these days looks like this, and your cost curve. And the delta between those 2 slopes being profit. And what we've actually seen over the past 3 years is this, right? We've seen this number come up. And we've seen this number stay flat or maybe tilt down a little bit. So it's not good. So how are you going to keep that from happening? You know, you got to do one of these, but when you do one of those, then that number's smaller. In order to get that number back where it was, you got to take this one and shrink it. You can only shrink your cost basis by changing your routines, changing your processes, changing your strategic frame. And I've taught you how to do it. I've told you exactly what to do. I'm available to you to continue to coach you on helping you do exactly those things. I'm not getting rich coaching you. I just enjoy helping people. Okay? And the MyGround Force software will do this for you, just if you will implement it. It will do it. And your relationships. You have ties to employees. This is a big one in the FedEx world. You have relationships with employees that they become a shackle. Well, you know, we don't really have we have a relationship with a customer that's a shackle to some degree. We'd agree with that. Your supplier, you have ways that you're doing business with suppliers, distributors. You may or may not have shareholders, but you're especially shackled by potential relationships with employees. especially those employees that can't evolve, and you're challenged with what to do about those. And we're going to talk about it. I've heard this, man, and I've given you this example of a guy who's been incredibly successful, but his margins are going down, and he is 100% committed to his humongous internal staff. He told me flat, I'm never letting any of my people go. And look, I'm not telling him how to run his business, but I can see the numbers. And he wants to, I understand my spreadsheets. I'm going to keep doing them. Okay. I've told you 3 years from now, he won't be here. I can guarantee you that. It's just, and I'm not being mean. I'm just saying it is going to get harder and harder to make money in this business. You guys already know it. I don't have to tell you. And then you have a set of values that maybe doesn't evolve with the times. Maybe you're Laura Ashley and you're trying to be, 1900 in the 1980s, and it just doesn't work. If you want your brand to be around, you're going to have to adjust it a little bit. Okay. You have a set of core beliefs, but you need to adapt them to the economic environment. I'm not saying lose your integrity ever. Okay. Not suggesting that. But your commitment to certain values might become a dogma, and you've got to watch out for that. That I don't do that because it's not how we do business. You ever hear that? All right, now let's talk success story. IBM's been around a long time. They're one of those Fortune 100s in 1966. But through this, in the late 70s into the 80s, we started to see a move away from mainframes and into smaller computing, right? We've talked about Moore's Law, where the capabilities of technology, particularly in the computing world, double every 18 months. And it's been true. It's proven. I'm not even going to teach it to you because it's just a fact. And then as you get into the late 80s and early 90s, we could also talk about Apple. Apple went down, practically fired Steve Jobs, practically blew up, brought Steve Jobs back, became relevant again with some new products. Dell came along, cheap manufacturing, domestic manufacturing of cheap computers for the home PC market. These are all competitors to IBM. And IBM said, God dang, man, what's going on? We're getting our asses kicked. And so they made a move. They were definitely a candidate for revolution. They were still living in the 50s, in the 60s, in the late 80s and early 90s. Now, I use IBM as an example of where I learned this lesson. I never believed this lesson. I didn't believe one man could make this kind of difference. But I was proven wrong, and I have since made sure that I understood the concept that one man can make an enormous difference. I've tried to be that man in the organizations that I've managed. I have looked back in other organizations. I have seen who was that man. And that man for IBM was called a dinosaur. But along came Lou Gerstner. He became their CEO in 1993. Now, listen. Where did Lou Gerstner come from? Did he come from some other high-tech company? No. He was making cookies. He came from RJR Nabisco. Well, why did IBM hire him? Because he was one hell of an ass-kicking CEO. That's why. And they needed that. And man, he proceeded to turn IBM into Big Blue. I mean, now, he didn't stand still. He didn't practice active inertia and keep doing the things the way it's always been done. He changed the internal culture. He absolutely declared war on the internal culture. He slashed costs, which including people. He changed how they did business. But he changed the brand view to his customers. He recognized what was going on in that marketplace. And by the way, it's 2:50. I told you we're going to go a little bit over, so please bear with me. I want you to hear this. He understood what was going on in that marketplace, and he knew big companies didn't like doing business with little companies. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. Tim, we like what you're doing. We like your products, but we're a multi-billion-dollar company. We like doing business with a multi-billion-dollar company. because then they got skin in the game and they're not going to go out of business. You could go out of business with your great product and you're going to leave me hanging. Lou understood that. He understood his target market was not the mom and pop cash register. He left that to NCR. He knew his target market was AT&T. Right? It wasn't AT&T in those days, but let's talk about it. You might not understand if I talk about the other ones. Verizon, PepsiCo, the U.S. government, J.P. Morgan. He understood that was his target market. And what they wanted was stability and responsibility. They had ancient networking equipment too, computing equipment. So they wanted a plan that helped them move out of that in a stabilized manner with a partner who they could trust to be responsible. And Gerstner absolutely nailed it. And so he had to do that. And he had to bring his organization along. And it's huge, man. It's like 500,000 people. He had to bring that along, okay? And he just did an outstanding job. Personal leadership. One man made that kind of difference. He identified the need and the market for his target customers, and he executed. Remember, execute relentlessly. They did that. They turned IBM away from being a big iron company to a dependable software and service company, to big companies. They became Big Blue. They charged an absolute fortune for consulting because they were stable and they were responsible. They could be trusted. So what Big Blue did is they transformed through renewal. They let some stuff go now. They let some people go. They let some internal processes and values and structure, they let that go. They focused on who they were going to be in the market going forward. They changed that. So they kind of renewed themselves instead of revolutionizing overnight. And certainly I have not advocated revolutionizing overnight. But what I am telling you is you need to add some tools to your toolkit so that you can properly enable your future. All right. So let's talk about active inertia in a TSP company. See if you recognize any of these symptoms. Now, you might recognize them in your company. If it is, you need to fix it. You might recognize it in your competitor, right? I still call him competitor. And if that contractor is in your station, you're competing with him for anything that happens in that station. And you need to be the prettiest girl at the dance. Okay, you need to be working on it. Okay, now this is my interpretation of active inertia. May not be yours, but this is how I see it. Nothing has changed. It's still trucking. We're at FedEx, it's still trucking. When we come out the other end, we're still going to be running trucks at FedEx. I believe that is active inertia. If you believe that, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. You're not seeing what Wall Street's seeing. Matt Woodruff is one of the top Wall Street analysts on Wall Street. He's telling you it ain't the same. You might want to listen. If you have that attitude, you are practicing active inertia. Folks are just trying to sell me something. Any money I spend is a cost. The way to be profitable is not spend money. You ever been in a contractor's meeting and heard that? I see it on Facebook. Look, we've talked about the cost of opportunity cost, right? We've talked about that. And we've talked about not spending money to spend money, but investing in your business and ensuring you get the proper return. We've talked about the return you can get by leveraging technology. Okay. I've been a contractor forever. I don't need any of that vision, mission, strategy, mumbo jumbo. I guarantee you've heard that one. I have everything I need to know in my head. That is active inertia. Is how can you lead your company when everything that you need to know is only in your head? This is the way I've always done things. It works for me, and I'm going to keep doing it. I've given you examples of FedEx contractors who have told me that almost word for word. And I'm not talking about 5 years ago. I'm talking about 5 months ago or 2 months ago because I hear it regularly. That's active inertia right there. That's almost right in accordance with the definition. I know lots of people at FedEx, I'll be fine. That used to work, folks. That don't work anymore. You used to be, if you were a famous person, you could get away with driving drunk. You can't do that anymore. I don't care who you know at FedEx. It won't be fine. Does that sound like active inertia to you? Have you seen any of these things? Do you recognize any of these things in your company? Do you recognize them in your competition? Fellow contractors? That's active inertia. Okay. All right. I don't care about all these KPIs. Pedals. I know what I'm doing. I just gave you an example of a man I really respect who told me that. And while I can empathize, it's just not true, boy. It's just not true. None of us liked the way that safety score worked when it first came out, but guess what? There's some people who are former contractors because of that safety score. And now they've changed it along the way, but they didn't relax the remedies that they practice. The contract is the contract. If you haven't read the contract, you might not know that. That is true. I don't need to read the contract. I know how to run trucks. Yep. You might know how to run trucks. That contract is going to ultimately bite you in the hind parts. I promise you. There's a lot of things that's coming in that contract. I've talked to you about the things I think are going to show up in that contract that we're going to see at the 1st of August. If you've never read the contract, you better read the next one. It ain't going to be the same. All right. So what happens to employees who can't evolve? Hey, if you got any questions on active inertia, shoot them to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen on that toolbar. Just move your cursor down there. Shoot me some questions. Also on questions on anybody who can't evolve, shoot it to me. All right. So change. Look, I have told you that I've managed truck drivers all over. I have managed employees all over the world of all sorts. And what I've found is that for the most part, people are the same all over the world. You can motivate them the same way. Some of the culture stuff is different. In fact, all the culture stuff is different. You have to adapt it to that culture, but the same basic concepts work. But boy, I'm telling you right now, when I started managing truck drivers, I was in for a rude awakening, because most of the stuff that I had practiced in my successful corporate career and private equity career was not working in the truck driver world, because that's a unique group of folks. You already know that. And they are the least change adaptive group of employees that I've ever seen. And they especially practice active inertia in their personal life as well as their professional life. And you got some folks in your organization that are great drivers, but getting them to do what you want them to do is a big time challenge. And you're going to have to assess that as we go through. So change challenges them. Okay. And you're having to change your company, whether they believe it or not. This metals thing that's happening, they have to positively contribute to your metals performance or you're in trouble. They can't continue to screw up hours of service or you're going to get hammered. They can't continue to be late or leave doubles connected in the yard or not put dollies where they go. If you don't do that stuff, they're going to start penalizing you on your metal score. You watch. Okay? Those guys have to comply. They have to keep up. And it's going to be a challenge for you to see how you handle these guys. Okay? So what is your culture? Are they adapting to your culture? You know, when companies evolve at a pace, sometimes folks can't keep up. You know, there's books out there called Pioneers and Settlers. Okay? Fortunately for me, I've been blessed with the ability to be a pioneer and a settler, but I'm probably more a pioneer than I am a settler. I'm much more comfortable going into the forest and chopping down the trees and building it than I am sitting there and running it every day. Some people are way better settlers than me. I'm the guy that can set it up, and then I'm like, Let somebody else run it. Like I said, I've lived 7 lives. That's a key performance indicator on a pioneer who's not a settler. And you got those guys in your company, they're going to have trouble keeping up with the growth rate or the way things are changing. And this is not the same FedEx changes they've seen in the past. Your challenge is to help them understand that. You can't double down on the same position to just keep an employee. You can't say, well, I'm going to keep him because he's been here for a long time. And you're going to have the employees who are making the positive contribution that you need from them, that you better be measuring at the individual level. We've talked about that. And that their performance is making the proper contribution to your overall performance. You can't afford to bring anybody along. They have to adapt. You have to have a culture that kind of forms that, right? You know, what if that round peg becomes a square peg, but the hole's still round as things change over time, right? One of the things that great leaders can do is figure out who is the right person for the right seat at the right time. That's your challenge. There's nobody else in your organization that you can delegate that to. You may have a couple guys that you work with on it, but most FedEx contractors are not so big that the AO, the CEO, is removed from that decision. You got to have a culture that you can form things around, right? And we talked about how to create that culture. And you got to have the fit. You got to have employees who fit that culture. And that culture is based on handling change, because this ocean that you're on is in constant state of change. And you have to evolve your hiring practices to ensure that who you're bringing in fits what you need them to be able to do. So you need to change how you're hiring. You need to change how you're assessing people. You're hiring managers. You have a way you've always done it. You might want to do some research and find a personality test that kind of matches what you need in a manager. And you might want to start using that, because the impact of getting it wrong can be huge in this tenuous environment that we're in. So I talked before about data, how you can go get data at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, at gutcheckit.com. I mean, don't live in a little insular world where you think the only data you need comes from your settlement. No, you're on this economic ocean. So go get some data, man. There's a lot of people forecasting the weather. Don't wait for FedEx to forecast it. Go get the weather data from everywhere. Go find out what's going on economically in your area. That information is available down to the tiniest detail. Look in the Fed book for your area. Know what's going on economically. That's going to tell you what's going to happen in your FedEx locations. You'll know it before FedEx does, but probably not, because they're studying that data. That's how they get their forecasts every quarter. They roll that up. They're already doing it. Watch that FedEx forecast. They just don't give it to you for your area. You're going to have to do it yourself. But you're going to need managers who can fit in that kind of environment. If you hire a manager who doesn't like to be held accountable by programs like the Metals program, he could be incredibly disruptive, and he might sink your ship. Okay? If you have a manager and you've decided to use the My Ground Force solution, the Fusion solution, where we can run your whole company for you except operations management and AO. We can do everything else from recruiting all the way through. We can do it all by fusing the best-in-class technology with the best-in-class technology adept humans. If you've got some managers who are not good in that environment, they can sink your ship. So you've got to have the right fit. So you have to adapt how you do things to ensure when you bring drivers in, they're the right fit. When you bring managers in, they're the right fit. When you bring an office manager in, it's the right fit. When you bring mechanics in, they need to be able to match the culture. Okay? So it's extremely important that you understand that. And, you know, personality test is a way to do it. I used to use those back in my corporate days. Look, I'm not going to run away from this. I remember hiring drivers. If they had a CDL, I hired them because I couldn't get anything else. I didn't figure out about fit. Now, we did assess some things. I did fire people in training even when I needed drivers because they demonstrated the wrong attitude. Oh, fit. Here's a lesson from Tim Goss Pass, and you probably already know this. I mean, I've run some big organizations, but I taught my people, we hire attitude. I don't care. I don't want to say I don't care about education because education matters in certain situations, but attitude matters more than aptitude. Over aptitude every single time. Person with the right attitude is going to end up being the right fit who can adapt to your culture. The person with the right aptitude might think he's too smart for that, or he already knows. You guys know those guys, but use that in your hiring. Just because a guy has experience driving a truck does not make him a good fit for what you're trying to do. I remember I bought a company in Memphis. I told you this story, and I told you how I adapted payroll. But what I didn't tell you is half those drivers I ended up either letting go or they left on their own because they couldn't adapt to my culture. They told me, I've been driving a long time at FedEx. I know what I'm doing. I'm like, I don't give a damn. This is how we do it in my company. And I don't care if you leave. I will not break how we do business in order to make you fit. I won't do it. And they left, and we were just fine. We had some rough times. I'm not going to say we didn't go through some rough times. We did, man. The first 8 months of owning that company was a total bitch. But we turned it around, and we quadrupled revenue in 2 years. But not with the same people. Experience does not equal fit. You need to think about how you develop employees. You know, this company I told you about this weekend, man, they have, and I had the same thing, a very aggressive driver training program and a biannual recertification program. I'm telling you, the studies show a couple years down the road, what you taught them 2 years ago begins to wane. You need to refresh that training. In the Navy, we retrained on the same stuff every year. We had to recertify every year in every aspect of our certifications. And to be a Navy combat pilot, you got this many certifications. You were constantly training to get recertified. And what you did on mission didn't matter. You had to come back and take that test. Even though you did that in the real world, it didn't matter. You still had to come back and go through that certification process. That was the culture. And to fit in that culture, you had to be able to handle that pressure. Because if you failed one of those, that was not good. So develop your employees, and part of that development is to get them to drive the way you want them to drive, to value the safety technology, to value the concept of metals and the components of that and how they contribute to it, to value the concept of personal objectives that you're going to give to them, to how they can fit in the culture. That's part of employee development, and we have to do that more now than we've done in the past. Value your exits, okay? When people leave, talk to them. Understand why they left. Learn from it. The other thing you can do is as you talk to people, I've had truck drivers that wanted to be more than a truck driver. So I would help them be more than a truck driver. I would talk to them. We'd develop a plan. I would refer them, hey, go listen to this series of podcasts. Go read this book, come back, and I'll talk to you about it. And then you'll see if that's really what you might want to do. And if it is, then I'll help you if I can go down that path, even though it means you're leaving my company. Why would you do that? Okay, well, you're demonstrating the kind of culture that people want to be in when you're doing that. What you're telling your drivers when you do that, because that word gets out. You think that guy didn't go tell people what I was doing for him? And look, I've always managed like that. I didn't show up doing that at FedEx. It's always been successful for me. And I learned it when I was a really young naval officer, and it worked for me forever, even till now. But he spread that word. And as soon as he does that, people see, well, Golf is sticking to his culture. He is valuing people. Quality principle number 2. On the list of core values, we will take care of our own. Remember, all the way back there, all the way back there, session 6. You have to live that. Remember, I talked to you about that. You got to live it. And you can sometimes cultivate your exits, the folks who are leaving your company, in a way that you can help your existing organization. I've done it many times. I've helped guys get interviews in other companies because that's where they wanted to go. And they were busting their ass for me, so I'm going to bust my ass for them, even though they're going to leave. It could be 2 years from now, that guy goes somewhere else, gets some experience that I can't give him, and then I hire him back. What if you sent one of your drivers to another place where he could learn to be a BC, and 2 years from now you need a BC, and you call him up? He's going to remember that. He's coming right back to you. Think 1 year, 3 year, 5 years ahead. If you're a CEO, you need to do that in your people policies as well. You can't do it if you're crunching numbers on your spreadsheets. There are so many things you need to be doing as a successful CEO other than spreadsheets. I know there's guys out there that think I'm an idiot for saying that, and they have told me to my face that I'm wrong. But I'm okay with that because I know I'm right. There's the astronaut. Late to the game, but he's there. All right, so what's our summary? A thoughtful implementation of organizational changes needed in a company will result in success. Okay, you cannot just react. You cannot just keep doing the same things. You cannot keep hammering the nail after it's below the wood level. You have to have a thoughtful implementation of your organizational change. You need to renew your approach. Now, you might need to renew it fast, given on what's going on. Use the IBM example, not the Firestone example. Now you have some real-world examples that you can study. You can go online and study what happened. You can see it. I've given you the highlights. If you do that, you'll be successful. If you do what I've taught you in this 12-week master's class in how to be a Fortune 500 executive, you're going to be fine. Look, I'm available to help you. Okay. Again, I'm not getting rich being your mentor. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is add value to your business. I need this network to be strong because, look, I need strong contractors as customers. And I want to help you be a strong contractor. You give me a chance, I guarantee you I help you. Remember what we say at My Ground Force: automate, optimize, succeed. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Do we have any questions, Paulo, in the background there? Questions? Paulo, are you still there? I hope I didn't put Paulo to sleep. All right. Well, I told you we go a little bit long. Hopefully you're not too late picking up your child. I appreciate your attention in this webinar series, How to Prosper During the FedEx Transformation. Learn to think like a Fortune 500 executive. Hey, next week, it's Line Haul Summit time. It's going to be a great time. I'm so excited about the Line Haul Summit. Come see us. We're booth 100. You won't be able to miss us. Starts Wednesday night, okay, for the reception. The expo will be open. Come in there, get your badge, get your drink, come see me. You won't be able to miss me. We'll be right there at the entrance. Come talk to me about whatever you want to talk about. Look, we're going to have a lot of people in the booth. We'll be able to demonstrate. We'll be able to do software demonstrations in 4 different locations in that booth. You can see anything you want to see about the My Ground Force software. We'll got it. Obviously, we can demo it all. Everybody there knows exactly what they're doing. Okay? And we're going to have TireView Live in the booth with us. So if you guys have been wondering about TireView Live, come see us. We can show you the hardware. We can show you how easy this is. You need to be using TireView Live. It'll be the best $1,100 per truck you ever spent. Look, you're going to save 3% on fuel. You're going to double the life of your tires, and you're going to eliminate roadside tire incidents that we all know cost you $2,000 at a minimum dollars a piece. And it's the #1 cause of breakdown in the FedEx network, blown tires. Come let us fix that for you and give you the data inside the MyGroundForce software. Come learn about our Fusion solution next week. Our partners are going to be there. DMG Go is there. Bright Flag Recruiting is there. We're going to be there. TireView Live is there. Look, we can help you minimize your cost to operate your line haul company. Okay? And we will not let you down. Come see us at the Line Haul Summit. If you have not registered, there's still time. Put in the coupon code GroundForce24 to get a discount. I'm speaking 4 different times, I think. I'm leading 2 different sessions. And then I have a panel that I'm on. I'm going to talk about fuel profitability. You've already seen me do that. Then I have a speaking opportunity to the whole group as part of the keynote address. So, hey, you won't be able to miss me. I'll be the guy in the purple jacket. Just look for purple. You'll find me. I hope to see a bunch of you guys next week. Come see us at the Line Haul Summit. Hey, thanks for attending this really long webinar series, but it's been great. I've enjoyed putting this on. It's been a lot of hard work. I've learned a lot. Hopefully you have. We'll start another webinar series in the fall. Remember, if you need my help, you can get me at support@mygroundforce.com. We hope to be your partner. Give us a chance. We'll help make you successful. All right, this is Tim Goff signing off from the webinar series, Prosper Deer and the FedEx Transformation. You guys have a great week. See you at the Line Haul Summit. Take care.